We have so much to talk about, but I'm so delighted that you're able to hang out with us in the Grand Hall of Union Station and talk rail.
It's a good place to have a conference, huh?
I cannot disagree with you on that one. So how's life?
Life's good. Last year we launched a new strategy at Norfolk Southern. It's a vision that I firmly believe is a better way forward for our franchise, and it really is built on what Todd talked about, this balance between service, productivity, and growth, because we've got a growth franchise that faces the fastest growing segments of the U.S. economy, and we're going to invest in it.
Which is awesome, and I want to make sure we talk about that. So let's hit the elephant in the room real quick. There's a lot of elephants out there, and the first one is let's talk about the looming strike for the auto workers, right? So they're talking about midnight tomorrow, that could all kind of come crashing down. Can you add some color from your perspective on that?
Yeah, and candidly, one of the strengths of our franchise is the fact that we serve more than 50% of all light vehicle production in the United States. That's going to be an enduring strength for us, whether or not there's a strike, right? What my understanding is from talking to our customers is that, there's a potential for a strike. They probably won't strike all plants of all the big three. There are ground counts available. There are finished vehicles that are waiting to be moved. So, we could see normal volumes on us for a week to 10 days before it has any impact on our volumes.
Okay, so one of the things that I'm always fascinated by is, because you got to figure out risk mitigation in some respect, because you're trying to say, okay, this might happen, but it might not. And to your broader point is, if it does happen, it might be strategically throughout, and it's not the whole system. How do you plan for that?
Well, I think that even if all of the big three plants were struck, which they won't be, we don't think, that would only impact 30 to 40% of our automotive volumes. So we're going to keep providing great service to our automotive customers. We'll take that week to 10 days to clean up any inventory that's available to ship, and then we'll see where we are.
Does that create issues of having equipment in the right space or the right spot, or does that not necessarily become an issue?
Yeah, it potentially could, which is why it's really important for us to stay close to our customers and kind of figure out where this thing is headed.
Okay, so then let's kind of transition from that and let's talk service, because this all kind of plays into that, right? So service levels, obviously they were kind of coming down. They seem to have come up. They seem to be bouncing around a little bit, specifically when we talk about speed. The shippers out there are trying to get some sense of things kind of leveling off and some normalcy. What is normal now? Where do you think normal goes? Do we continue to see improvements in service levels?
Yeah, Norfolk Southern will continue to see improvements in service levels. When I became CEO in May of last year, I made a commitment to improving service on Norfolk Southern and investing over the long term. And so what you've seen from us is, since I became CEO, we've been on a hiring spree. We've added about 1,500 employees. We're really building resiliency into our network. And that's part of our strategic vision, is that I know we're going to grow over time. And so we're going to invest in our network over time. And we're not going to try and time the market, because candidly, we haven't done a good job of that in the past. I know that the U.S. economy is going to grow over time, and I know that the U.S. consumer is going to show strength, and we have a franchise built to serve the U.S. consumer. And so right now, candidly, what we're doing is we're sitting down and we're talking to some of our larger customers about a 5-year horizon for service. If you want to grow with Norfolk Southern over the next 5 years, what does your service need to look like? Those are the conversations we're having between marketing and operations and our customers. And it might be at a different level, or it might be even measured in a different way. So we're looking out on the horizon to think about where we want to be in 5 years.
Yeah, and on the measurement stuff, that's the one thing that kind of gets me, because we all tend to just look at speed because that's the easiest one. It's readily available. But at the same time, speed doesn't tell you a whole lot, right? So what type of metrics do you expect us to really start looking at as we go?
You know, we've got some customer-facing metrics that we share with our customers, you know, intermodal availability, on-time delivery in the merchandise network. But really, a sophisticated supply chain takes the first derivative of that and looks at the variability associated with that, right? You might be on time 80% of the time within a week, but being on time 40% one day and 100% the next day isn't good. You want to be on time 80% of the time every single day. So we're measuring the standard deviation of our service quality as well.
I'm giggling because you're basically describing my ability to get to meetings on time. One day I'm 100% of the time, one day I'm 40%. So it's horrible.
Well, you got to improve on that.
Yeah, I'm trying, man, every day. So let me just ask you to talk a little bit about your background, some of your experience before you took over as CEO, because I think this leads into a handful of additional questions that I kind of want to follow up with you on. So do you mind just kind of giving a little bit of a rundown of some of the things that you've experienced over a few years?
Yeah, you know, I've been really fortunate to move around in effectively 3 different divisions at Norfolk Southern, and not necessarily because I wanted to, but someone took an interest in my career. I started in our finance department and earned my chartered financial analyst designation at that time. So to me, the numbers matter, right? And the shareholder value matters a lot. And then I moved between, effectively over the last 25 years, between operations-oriented roles and customer-facing roles, but they were all about service delivery. And what really became important to me was trust and relationships with our customers. You know, I was in our coal group for a while. I was in charge of coal transportation. That's where I met Todd. And then in 2009, I moved into our chemicals team. And think about like what the chemicals landscape looked like in the United States in 2009. Natural gas prices were still really high. Natural gas was really inexpensive over in the Middle East. And so people were really concerned that we were going to start importing chemicals into the United States, and the U.S. chemical industry would go down. And so candidly, Norfolk Southern we didn't have a growth mindset around chemicals when I walked into that role, and we hadn't been all that engaging with our customers. And I got a full face full of that in some of my first meetings, and deservedly so. But, you know, my goal was I got to build trust with these customers, right? And I got to prove to them that I'm going to make promises and keep promises. And ultimately, we got to the point with one of the customers who had one of the more difficult conversations with me a couple years later, where we ended up doing a handshake deal on growth and sketched out the MOU on a bar napkin one night. And it, in essence, still referred to as the bar napkin deal. So it really is. What I've learned over those 25 years in those customer-facing roles, it's about building trust. And that's what our strategy is about, right? We want our customers to trust that we're going to provide a good service product to them, not just this year, but next year and 5 years from now, so they can build Norfolk Southern into their supply chain needs.
Yeah, it's interesting as you kind of talk through this. It hits me because I'm like, so I have to be humble enough to listen, right? Because sometimes people are telling me stuff, and I'm like, oh, no, I know what to do. But when I actually listen to what they're saying, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. I can do that. Yeah. So I'm sure it's one of those things that over time you kind of figured that out, because I think one of the things that as you laid out some of the vision, you wouldn't have gotten there without kind of hearing what they have to say.
Oh yeah, you know, what I talk to my team about, all 20,000 NS employees, is you got to lead with humility, right? You got to listen to folks, and you got to get input from people, and you know, then you make your own decision. But you know, for us to be a customer-centric, operations-driven organization means we're going to listen to our customers, and they're going to tell us where markets are headed over the next 5 to 7 years. And so we've built a strategy around that that's designed to win tomorrow and go to where markets are headed.
Man, you perfectly segued to the next topic I wanted to kind of ask about, is where markets are going. So chemicals, we've seen a huge explosion in production and facilities, and it seems like they're going to keep adding more and more production online. Can you give us a little bit of insight of where you see that market going and how the railroads play into that particular space?
Yeah, absolutely. So think back to my earlier commentary about the chemicals industry in 2009, 2010. Yep. Everyone thought that it was going to be on the decline because of imports. Well, now the petrochemical industry is all about building production to export overseas, right? And so again, that tells you the strength of the U.S. economy, right? And the onshoring. And I do want to talk to you a little bit about that later.
Good. I'll make a note. We'll make sure we get there.
You know, right now, I'd tell you the plastics industry is stressed. You know, people aren't doing takeout as much as they were a year ago, 2 years ago, and there's a big plastics component of that. You know, ultimately, I think we're going to start to see some improvement in our chemicals franchise probably next year.
Okay. Well,
but longer term, a lot of strength because of macro trends, including onshoring and access to cheap and reliable energy. I can't overstate the importance of that.
Yeah, they've already announced expansion in manufacturing, specifically in the plastic pellet type of arena, and they've been ordering a bunch of cars for that particular space. And ultimately, you know, a lot of that stuff does go into automotive, and it kind of, that trickle effect is huge. And so you guys see it at the front end sometimes where you're actually moving those chemicals, and then you also see it on the downstream end when they're getting the finished product. So as we start thinking about the export markets in general with chemicals, because we've seen, for example, China kind of slowing down a little bit, we've seen the global markets kind of stagnant, it feels like, in some cases. When do you anticipate kind of getting over that hump from a macro standpoint?
Yeah, so that it is what you're seeing a lot is dependency on the global economy, right? A lot of the new plants were built to ship overseas, and with manufacturing kind of weak in Europe and in China, we're not seeing as much of that. Okay. You know, last fall, earlier this winter, we were exporting, we being the United States and Norfolk Southern, were exporting a lot of energy products to Europe, right? For reasons that are well understood. The winter was mild there, and so there's a surplus of energy over there. We'll see what the winter brings this year. But you know, frankly, the export in the petrochemical industry is going to be dependent upon global macro factors.
Yeah, and a lot of that you guys won't really touch. It'll go straight out to the port and goodbye.
Well, we handle it to the port.
Well, that's true too. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Within the export market, one of the areas that's seen some strength there is the coal market, right? So, but that's not the only market that's there. Obviously, you have the distinction between like the Appalachian type of coal, and then you've got the Powder River Basin type of coal. All of that, and so coal has been kind of on this secular decline, and now it feels like it's kind of leveled off, and so trying to get some understanding of kind of how you see the coal market and where you see it going, I think would be helpful to add some context to this, because it's not as simple as people say, oh, it's just going to keep going down because we're going to get rid of coal. I don't think that's reality per se. So.
Yeah, you know, I think you could segregate it in two different ways, all right? The thermal coal market, right, for firing up utilities is pretty weak right now because natural gas is at about 275 a million BTU. So natural gas is dispatching ahead of coal on the curve. Now, overseas, you're seeing a lot of demand for thermal coal. You're seeing a lot because you got in India, for instance, right? There are some countries that are rapidly growing. You see a lot of demand for metallurgical coal overseas. And so, you know, it's come down some. I'd say earlier this year, met coal was selling at about $450 per metric ton, which is a phenomenal number. Now it's down to $250. That's still a really, really high number. And that still provides the positive cash flow for our producers, our miners, to reinvest. And domestic met is still really strong because of all the non-residential construction that's going on right now in the United States, all the steel making because of some of these macro factors.
Yeah, and we've seen the steel numbers, specifically on the number of carloads. They've looked pretty good.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a disconnect between some of the different markets, like the lumber and the paper and stuff. It kind of softened a little bit, but metal's done really well. It's actually nice to see. It gives me confidence in some of the things that are happening with the global. I mean, with the macro economy. So, and to your point, it feels like it structures. Is that kind of how you're seeing a lot of that?
Yeah, we've got a unique seat with
Okay.
a view into the U.S. economy. We've got 5,000 customers spread across 6 different continents.
Yeah.
And just as we were talking about automotive earlier, it's rare that all of our markets are up, and it's rare that all of our markets are down. And right now we're seeing metals and construction, we're seeing automotive up. And what you're seeing is that investments in new factories are up 75% year over year.
Yep.
Because of a lot of the Infrastructure Act and the CHIPS Act. And new factory builds are at a run rate right now that's 3x of what we saw from 2010 to 2020. And so you're seeing a lot of EV production. There's been $70 billion of EV production in North America announced, and about a third of that is on our lines. And in fact,
That's pretty good.
I just heard a new term the other day called the battery belt, which is where you're seeing a lot of production for batteries being announced coming out of Indiana and into the Southeast. And earlier today, I was meeting with the Secretary of Commerce for Indiana. And, he's seeing the same things we are, right? A lot of this onshoring into the United States is because of the cheap and reliable energy, a really pro-business environment, logistics infrastructure that's already in place, and a talented workforce. And for us, the good thing is a lot of that's in the Midwest and in the Southeast, which is the heart of our service territory.
Yeah, and if that energy belt is exactly how you say it, that's in the sweet spot right there for you, in a lot of ways for you guys. So it's kind of taken advantage of that. So let me ask you a little bit about intermodal. I'm all over the place. I apologize. I'm scattered here, but I do want to touch base. So intermodal, and I even mentioned this to you before we jumped on. I felt like intermodal missed an opportunity when things the supply chains went crazy, and which was somewhat unfortunate because it was set up to say, gosh, we have all this freight coming in and moving. So then it started shifting from the West Coast into the East Coast. How are you guys kind of viewing the intermodal marketplace right now? Let's kind of level set it there, and then we can kind of dive into where you guys kind of see it going.
Yeah, well, we've got the most powerful intermodal franchise in the East, as you know. Like every day, about 100 million people wake up within 50 miles of a Norfolk Southern intermodal ramp. We will continue to invest in intermodal. That will be an enduring franchise strength for us. Right now, our international volumes are actually up year over year. We've taken share away from truck. As supply chain issues have unwound, people have moved stuff back to rail. The domestic market is weak. I think we may have seen an inflection point in spot truck rates. So that would be a positive for us as we move into the back half of the year and into next year.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think we're seeing the bottom on those spot rates.
And that's what I'm hearing from our channel partners too.
Okay, yeah. When things are coming into the East Coast, and they have an opportunity, the general sense is that usually it will want to go by truck, but that's not always the case. Are you guys seeing that people are saying, okay, it comes into the ports, into the Gulf, and into the East? I might have said West, sorry, into the East. Are they putting it onto the train to move it inland towards Chicago and in towards Indiana and all of that?
Eric, we've proven that we can be competitive even on short haul international moves. In fact, one of our biggest lanes is from the Port of Savannah to Atlanta.
Nice. Okay.
One of our biggest lanes is
Savannah's been exploding. So yes.
Right. And one of our biggest lanes is from Charleston up to Greer, South Carolina, where the BMW plant is, and that's the world's largest BMW plant. It was originally built to export product over to China, and now they've increased the size of it as well, and they're exporting it and they're shipping it domestically. And so, we figured out how to generate enough revenue density on existing trains that we can compete even in short haul markets.
Which is awesome because I think there was always been kind of this arbitrary number, right? Anything below 500 or 550 miles becomes really difficult for rail. It's more about what is the customer asking for and what is their need rather than the distance per se.
Yeah, and where can we be efficient? Where can it fit our network? And what we always talk about is finding business where our customers can be successful and we can be successful.
But a win-win situation, I think, is always nice. So I was talking with Rebecca Laszlo, who is the VP of supply chain for Crate and Barrel yesterday. So she was here, and she was indicating that they're always looking for win-win situations. And I think it feels different today than it did, say, 10, 15 years ago. Because I think people felt like a win-win was, I win, you kind of win, right?
Yeah.
Now it's truly, let's both win. And I think that goes back to your relationship comment. We're not seeing a peak season this year for intermodal. A lot of that, I think, has to do with what's going on with inventory levels. When you talk to customers and so forth, what's the sense of when do they see those levels coming back? When do inventories right size?
I think we're pretty close to the end of the inventory destocking.
Okay.
Which means volumes going forward are going to be dependent on how competitive intermodal is with truck, and then consumer activity.
Okay. So you brought up nearshoring. So I think as part of the macro discussion here, I think that's really important because as we can't just look at this as an isolated incident. The data that's been shown here over the last few days really does suggest that we're seeing more nearshoring. It's harder to quantify exactly. When you're looking at the nearshoring, how are you guys kind of viewing that?
We've got a great industrial development department, right, that works with local economic development authorities. Rail offers a lot of value, and frankly, rail should be handling more share than we are right now. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about that in a bit, I'm sure.
Yep.
But 9 of the top 10 states for doing business are in our service region. And so I think we're in pretty good shape with some of these macro factors.
Yeah, okay. And because the nearshoring can be U.S., when we talk about it, it can be U.S., Canada, it could be Mexico.
Yeah.
And even if it doesn't come to the U.S. and it goes, say, into Canada, into Mexico, you guys feel it, though.
Well, sure. Look, the strength of our franchise is we serve more than 60% of the U.S. population. Ultimately, that product is going to want to go to where the consumer is. We serve more than 50% of the U.S. manufacturing. Yeah. We serve more short lines than any other railroad in North America. So there's a lot of demand in our service region, no matter where that product is manufactured. And if it has to do with automobiles, since the fact that we serve more than 50% of U.S. light vehicle production, we're probably going to touch it at some point.
Okay, so I want to touch base on some economic trends, and then I want to transition to talk about some of the pandemic stuff. So when we really look at the bigger picture, let me get my glasses back on so I can see what the heck I'm talking about here. When we look at rail, and we look at the macro economy, what are the things that you guys are really looking at to kind of understand some of the pressures that are in the system and where it's going?
So as we look at the macro economy, obviously we're fully engaged and taking benefit of that relationship that we have with those 5,000 customers, right? Because they can give us some context and some colors that you don't necessarily see in the data.
Yep.
I look at the data a lot, right?
Right.
It's inventory levels, it's truck pricing, it's housing starts, it's light vehicle sales, it's the factory construction, right? It's coal consumption, steel manufacturing. It's all those things that we've talked about that drive this like portfolio of products that we handle. None of them are always going to be up. None of them are always going to be down.
So one of the things that I have a problem with, right, is I'm always optimistic, right? I've got that optimistic personality. So if somebody says, "How's your day going to be tomorrow?" I'm like, "It's going to be fantastic," right? And so shippers sometimes do that too, right? You say, "Okay, what's tomorrow look like?" They go, "Oh, it's going to be great," right? And so the reality ends up being that maybe tomorrow isn't as great as they said. How do you filter out that information? And because you collect all of that, you bring it kind of up, and you say, "Here's what our customers are saying." How do you come up with a conclusion that is based more on reality then?
Yeah, so you get those 5,000 voices, right?
Yeah.
You balance that and check it against a bunch of different data sources, right?
Yep.
And you make your own call. But
Yeah.
here's the point. We're going to grow over time,
Yeah.
right? And there are certain strategic assets that I know we're going to need over time. And that includes locomotives. It includes intermodal infrastructure. It includes freight cars to help us compete with truck. It includes track infrastructure. It includes technology, and it includes people. So instead of just precisely trying to time the market,
Right.
knowing that we're going to grow over time because of the confidence that I've got in our franchise and our customers in the U.S. economy, we're really focused on strategic investments at a sustainable rate over time so we can provide that good service to our customers in times of high demand and low demand.
Okay. Speaking of high demand and low demand, right? So the pandemic kind of hit and everything blew up, right? Instantaneously. What were some of the things that you learned as part of that? So it had to help, kind of help you put the vision together that you've been laying out about growth, right? So what were some of the lessons off of that?
You know, one was the commitment that the Norfolk Southern employees have to our customers. I mean, think about it. Wow, most people were sitting at home working from behind a computer screen. Our 16,000 craft colleagues were out there working and running trains every day. In fact, I talked to my management team about that today. They were out there, right, moving the economy, moving food products, right, moving medical supplies, right? And so that I got a lot of pride in that. One of the things that you really saw during the supply chain disruptions is the fact that up until that, everyone had been optimizing their own link in the supply chain, right?
Yep.
And what we've all got to do is realize we operate in a supply chain ecosystem, and that ecosystem is not going to be successful if all you do is pick up costs and throw them over the fence at your client. And so really
Right.
where the breakdown occurred is those links in the supply chain, whether it was chassis, whether it was intermodal terminals, whether it was warehouses, whether it was the drayage community. And so, you know, one of the approaches we've tried to take is really try to think in terms of us as operating in that supply chain ecosystem. So we just hired Stefan Loeb, right, who was a CMO of a short line.
Yeah.
You know, short lines are very entrepreneurial, and I wanted that DNA at Norfolk Southern, and I also wanted somebody who was really going to work on that link, that first mile, last mile. So we created the first vice president of first mile, last mile. You know, we've innovated Rail Pulse, which is going to be a wonderful way to provide great transparency and data on the North American rail car fleet, because we want to provide that level of transparency, whether it's on Norfolk Southern or on somebody else that we're connecting with.
No, I love it. I'm so excited when you guys hired Stefan. I've known Stefan for years, right? And he is so passionate about short lines. He just is, and it's kind of infectious. So that really kind of made me excited. Let's talk a little bit about your strategic vision. How did it come about? Did you just kind of have an epiphany one night and you go, this is what we're going to do? I have a feeling it's not quite that simplistic, but talk me through how did you get to where you got to this, we're going to go this way.
Well, we're students of history, right? And the numbers matter. I mentioned that I started in finance. And, you know, here's one thing I know. Rail over the last 25 years has ceded share to truck. Rail's less expensive than truck. Rail's safer than truck. Rail is more carbon efficient than truck. Rail has a capacity advantage than truck. So what's the one reason that we have ceded share to truck? Product quality. service, right? And it's because every 3 to 4 years, rails didn't invest in resources. And so every 3 to 4 years, we'd have a service crisis. And no company is going to be a growth company if you provide your customers with a lousy service product every 3 to 4 years. And in my role in CMO, as CMO, or in chemicals or in intermodal, I knew that we were leaving $800 million to $1 billion of revenue on the table because we couldn't handle all the volume. And I knew that our customers didn't really trust us over the long term, so they weren't growing with us. And so I said, there's got to be a better way forward, and basically ought to save like $80 million a year in avoided and furlough costs, right? And so, I was like, well, we're going to invest in the long term here, as I talked about, because we can grow over the long term. And so that's what we've been doing, and the math really works. Now, it's just like every other investment. The investment comes before the benefits, but we know that if you improve the quality of your product, generally there's going to be more demand for your product, right?
What? Supply-demand equation working? How dare that happen? So let's hit regulations just for a little bit. What are some of the regulations that you're seeing out there that are really on your radar, that we as a collective whole, as we think about strategy for the industry, what's on your radar?
Well, certainly you've seen me. I've been in D.C. a lot this year.
Yes, you have.
And I've been a really vocal proponent and advocate for many of the bills that are on the Hill on railway safety. And look, there has to be a bipartisan solution to enhance railway safety, and it's going to take the entire industry. The one derailment that has been so public on us was a failed wheel bearing on a car that no railroad owns, right? And so it's going to take the collective efforts of railroads, of shippers, of railcar owners and railcar builders. And so I'm pushing for a lot of the legislation out there. It makes a lot of sense, and I firmly believe it's not going to be too onerous on our customers or on Norfolk Southern. We'll still be able to compete with truck. It makes sense.
What is kind of the big one you're pushing right now?
Well, you've got in the Senate, you got the railway safety bill, and in the House, you got the Johnson-Sykes bill. Okay. And most of the provisions in those two bills make a lot of sense to me.
Okay. Any other regulations we need to have on our radar that you think are going to have a big impact longer term?
Now, I think that the best thing that rails can do is provide our customers with a really good service product and help our customers grow, and that takes a lot of heat off of everything. Because look, there are a lot of things that railroads do that are perfectly aligned with the administration's goals, whether it's a Republican administration or Democratic. And I've said this to Secretary Buttigieg and Administrator Bose and Chair Oberman. It's high-paying union jobs. It's investment in infrastructure and in growth. It's taking trucks off the highway. It's safety, and it's sustainability. I mean, everyone can get around that, right?
It sounds simple, You just mentioned high-paying jobs. On the labor front, how hard is it right now to find the next worker? Is it starting to get a little easier?
Yeah, it's gotten easier. We're still hiring. If anybody out there wants to be a conductor or knows anyone who does, we're hiring. Our conductor trainee pipeline is near a record high right now for us. There's still a couple areas where we need to continue to hire, but these are good jobs. They're hard jobs, but they're high paying with great wages, and they're attractive jobs.
Okay, because one of the things I think that the industry struggled with in total was once the pandemic hit, and it wasn't just the railroads, right? People were like, we need to downsize for a period of time. We need to do something, and then there was an expectation that all that labor will still be there and they'll come right back, and it didn't. And we kind of saw it ripple through everything, and I think one of the things that was hard was everybody just to be able to say, you know what, this happened, this was difficult, we now need to think about it differently. how have you been able to think about that? Because it just feels like labor's just been a really big topic.
Yeah.
And people get really upset about it.
Yeah, so my first day as CEO, I was out in the field.
Okay.
I was in the crew rooms.
Yeah.
I was in the cab of a locomotive because engagement with our 16,000 craft employees
Yeah.
is really important to me. But you're exactly right? The traditional model was the furlough. And when you furlough, let's say we would furlough 1,000 employees,
Right.
That would save us about $90 million a year.
Yep.
And then you'd call them back. Well, what we found out is a lot of people weren't coming back,
Right.
and we get about a 50% retention rate. So now all of a sudden we got to go hire 500 employees. Well, it costs $50,000 a person to recruit, hire, and train employees. So that $90 million becomes $65 million in savings. And I just told you we lost about $800 million
Right.
in revenue and made our customers mad. So,
Yeah.
what I'd rather do is collect that $800 million in revenue and keep our customers happy.
Yeah, and I, as you talk through this, a lot of your customers are probably saying, "Great, I'm glad you're talking about this. I'm glad you're working in this direction." Yet at the same time, I'm sure they're sitting there thinking, "This hasn't happened before." Right? Prove it to me.
Yeah, that's right. So it's
Yeah.
about that trust thing,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
I'm asking our customers to trust that we're going to provide them a resilient product because no one's ever done this before. It is a better way forward for Norfolk Southern. It's a groundbreaking approach in the industry. It works for us because of some of those unique strengths of our franchise that we talked about, because we know we're going to grow over time and we can invest in that. And so this year, our conductor training pipeline is amongst the highest on record, and our capital budget is about $2.2 billion, which is the highest it's been in about 7 or 8 years. So I'm proving it.
Do you see? Because I call it strategic relationships, right? That with your customers. Does that happen by just having discussions with them initially to help understand what their pain points are? Or is it more of, okay, we already know what your pain points are, you've told us that, we got to produce?
No, I think it is, you got to sit down and listen and understand where you're causing your customers pain. And, our job is to solve solutions, right? Or create solutions, solve problems for our customers.
Yeah.
And so the more you trust your customer and the more your customer trusts you, the more they're going to share and the more you can innovate together on solutions to your mutual benefit.
And I think that's one thing too, is they may be hesitant to share, right? They're like, I've shared this before, right? So I do, dialogue is always good. So we need to start wrapping up here because we're gonna have some questions, but one of the things I do want to ask about, though, is economic uncertainty, because as we talk about risk as part of this group, that economic uncertainty is paramount, right? Is the risk on the upside? Is it on the downside? I know that you are kind of a student of history, right? How do you navigate the economic uncertainty as we go forward?
Yeah, I think what I would tell you now is I feel more confident about the future than I did about a year ago. I think we're in a better spot.
Okay.
I think about strategy. And, when you sit down and you're a CEO, you're making decisions based on what's best 2 to 3 to 5 years down the road.
Right.
And again, the confidence that I've got in our franchise, the U.S. economy, and our customer base really allows me to take that approach.
Okay. Well, good. So, Todd, I'm sure we have questions.
We do.
Yeah.
We have
Okay,
plenty
kick us
of
off,
good
man.
questions. So let's
like
start
8
off
minutes, we're
and
good.
let's come back to service, because there's a question about, okay, carloads have been up a little bit this year on an overall basis. That hasn't translated to intermodal, but on the carload side, they've been up a little bit. As service continues to improve, as that product quality, as you call it, continues to improve, will that then beget carload growth? And is there a time horizon for when that investment starts to pay off?
Yeah, I think as our service improves, right now we'd handle more aggregates, we'd handle more metals, we'd handle more automotive business, right? Just turning those assets faster. I think what we're seeing in the domestic intermodal space is a function of a relatively loose truck market and consumer buying habits.
Okay. Great. What else we got, Todd?
Absolutely. A question about is there a level of service that you've come to in terms of a mile per hour target or a trip plan compliance target that NS needs to hit to be able to win back share? You mentioned, rail has lost share to truck over the last 15 years.
Yeah.
What level of service is out there? Have you thought about what that metric is, that KPI is that gets you to the point where you can bring some of that freight back to rail?
Yeah, I think, initially, a good starting point is our service levels in 2019, where we were running at about 22 and a half miles per hour in train speed. And I'm using publicly available metrics so that you can follow along. 21.5 hours in terminal dwell. But as I said, we're looking beyond that. And so the conversations that we're having with our customers now is 4 years from now, 5 years from now, in order to build Norfolk Southern into your supply chain even more, what level of service do you need? And we got to be able to deliver it, right? So we can't sign up for everything.
Yep.
But what level of service do you need? And what's the appropriate way to measure? Because customers really don't care about train speed or terminal dwell, right? They really care about, is that rail car going to show up at that loading dock when we said it was going to?
It's the term predictability.
Yeah,
Right? Yeah.
that's right.
So if you tell him 5 days, great, 5 days. If you tell him 14 days, like 14, I just need that predictability. Don't tell me 5 days and then have it 14 days.
Yeah, and the standard deviation around the mean has to be really low.
Okay.
It can't be 3 days one day and 7 the other.
Right.
Averaging to 5.
Yep. And I think also being honest when those things do happen, that you can say, okay, this is what's going on. We still have work to do.
Well, you brought up a great point. So it is not only that physical delivery of the goods, it's layering on top a best-in-class consumer-oriented experience. Look, I mean, I got 5,000 B2B relationships, but every single one of our customers knows how to order transportation with a click of an app on their phone.
Right.
And so, frankly, one of the reasons we relocated our headquarters from Norfolk to Atlanta is so we'd have access to this wonderfully diverse, technologically savvy workforce that's in Atlanta. And when you sit in my office, you can look across I-75 into Georgia Tech Stadium, but on purpose, when you sit in the Georgia Tech Stadium, you can look up and you can see the Norfolk Southern bill and the Norfolk Southern logo. That didn't just happen.
Yep. I get that. Being an Indiana University fan, that pains me though, man. I'm like, anytime you talk about other universities, it's hard. You got to say Big Ten.
What do you think about Purdue?
Oh well, since Tom is in the back and was a Purdue guy, I think Purdue's okay.
Just okay.
They're a Big Ten school, so we're good. Of course, every school here soon is going to be a Big Ten school, so who the heck knows?
All right.
Todd.
All right, we've got time for one more question. And that's somebody asking basically for an update on current events. There was a software outage recently that NS was involved in. How are you fully recovered from that, or did you lose any volume from that? And is that in the rearview mirror at this point for folks?
Yeah, that's in the rearview mirror. We had a vendor that had an error in its software and it shut our network down frustratingly for 12 hours. We're back and our service levels have rebounded. And we think it's a blip. We're going to overcome it, and we're going to figure out how to ensure that it doesn't happen again.
Well, Alan, I want to thank you. You have been so gracious with your time. It's been a delight to hang out, and the forthrightness with which you're willing to share is really great. I appreciate it. So with that, let's all give him a round of applause. Thank you, Alan.
Pleasure's all mine, Eric. Thank you.